I'd like to now introduce our speaker, Dr. Richard Fursman, who's here to speak on the 2023 YouLEAD Ukrainian Youth Exchange. Dr. Richard Fursman is a co-founder of HuLife, specializing in the dynamics of human behavior and change. He helps teams create purpose, strategic plans, and self-discovery. He advises government entities in the U.S. and Ukraine in the areas of organization development, community development, transformational change, leadership development, and management practices. He and his wife, Dr. Irina Fursman, have been doing leadership development and exchange work throughout Ukraine since 2011. And he and his wife now concentrate their efforts toward helping Ukraine through the development of youth leaders toward the rebuilding of the country and creating pathways for others to get involved. So if you will help me in welcoming Dr. Richard Fursman.
Thank you. Well, thank you. This is a real honor. And I'm a Rotarian too. I am part of the White Bear Lake Rotary Club. So it's wonderful to come and visit with you. So normally I present this with Irina, and so I'm going to take you on a very fast retrospective to bring you up to today. So yeah, that's me in the Navy. I'm not the officer. I'm the working one over there, getting congratulated after an Arctic trip in which I used to do impersonations, and Ronald Reagan was up with us, and so I would give my weather forecasts in various voices, and apparently that was positive for morale. So I was up in the Barents Sea, just north of Murmansk, Russia. And that part of the world is, in Archangel, is where their sub base is, their nuclear sub base, and where Romeus took his sub from Red October, if you remember that movie. So what made that significant is there was a sub, Alpha Class Fast Attack on the lower left there, and my wife's uncle was on that as the chief engineer, targeting my ship for destruction. So fortunately, we didn't come to that, and I ended up getting to meet her. Yeah, went up to the ice cap, and that's just a picture of one of the Soviet ships up close that was following us. So Irina's story started in Russia, or started after her family was sent to Siberia. Her father was a military officer as well in the Russian Air Force, and she grew up in eastern Siberia on a small base that was considered secret at the time called Mangaksto, and was very proud of her Soviet life, if you will, and didn't know much about the U.S. except for what the propaganda that came through their government, not surprising to many of us here. Her father died after the collapse of the Soviet Union. There was chaos in the Soviet Union. While we kind of saw that as maybe a celebration for them, it was really difficult for them. Their economy collapsed, their whole society collapsed, and it was ruled really by the mafia, and her father got caught up in not wanting to go along and was murdered. And so she traveled with her sister and her mother from Mangakto in eastern Siberia all the way to Ukraine, where her mother's family is from, in Simferopol, which is now occupied by Russia since 2014, and the little green men that walked in. If we remember that story. After the university, then she met me, and I know the picture's a little fuzzy, you can probably see one person in here who doesn't look like the others. We've got a lot of furs and a lot of fur hats, and then one baseball cap, and that's the nerd that you see over there on the other side. So she came to the U.S. We were married a little over 20 years ago, and blended our families, and then along came Global Synergy Group, Global Synergy Group, if you fast forward from that wedding picture 11 years, was designed to start doing exchanges with Ukraine. I went to Sweden back in 2001, taking city managers there, and city managers came back, and I got the idea, why not do this with Ukraine, only in a little bit different way. So in 2011, a group of us went to Ukraine, of city officials and business leaders. And that turned into working with their city on understanding strategy, developing a sense of community, and also getting in touch with Rotaries. And this all becomes more important later into the story. As we progressed, they said, listen, you're not going to change Ukraine by working with adults. The only way you're going to change Ukraine is by working with kids. Can we start sending our youth to America? Can you do a program? So in 2011, we started working with youth in bringing 14 to 17, 18-year-olds to the U.S. for about 5 weeks. And we also took U.S. students who worked with them over to Ukraine. And so this ended up being a bit of an exchange, and it was a leadership journey. It wasn't a sightseeing tour. It was really get down and dirty into developing some leadership. And so we did that through 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. And then things started to happen. Now, a little bit about Ukraine. Why is this such a horrible relationship with Russia at times? Over 20% of Ukrainians are married to Russians. Irina's mother was married to a Russian. So her Ukrainian mom was married to a Russian military. And this isn't uncommon in Ukraine to have both languages being spoken. It's also used as a weapon. Well, when Ukraine's kind of resisted communism, Stalin had a solution for that, which was if you're not going to collectivize your farms, then we're going to starve you to death. And in 32 and 33, over 7 million people starved to death, up to 10 to 25,000 people a day. And if you looked at the landscape, they had people collecting bodies all over. They actually had body collectors just getting them off streets and collecting them. And so this is in the conscious of the Ukrainian psyche ever since then. 2004 Orange Revolution. I don't know if you remember this guy. He was running for president. They didn't want him to win. They didn't want him alive. So one of Putin's favorites is poison, and so you can see the before and after picture of his poisoning. He did live through it. He ended up being elected president. Fast forward 10 years later, there was another civil unrest as Yanukovych, president, said, no, we're not going to join the European Union after all. We're going to stay in Russia's orbit. And that resulted in Occupy Kyiv, or Kiev as we say it. And during the occupation, it became violent and sharpshooters started shooting into the crowds. And one day they killed over 100 people. This is Independence Square. It's kind of a cut of what it looks like normally. And then this is what it looked like during the final days of Yanukovych's rule, when all chaos. He left and left behind and divided Russia, or divided Ukraine. Ukraine is about the size of Texas, has at one time 42 million. Now a third of the population is either is a refugee. So their refugees are scattered across Europe and the United States, and displaced internally within the country. This is the area that's now this is the area right here, Kherson, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, and Luhansk, that are still occupied. They've been kicked out of a lot of the areas when we came in 2014. This is where civil unrest was happening. So we decided to do a peace summit July 4th and 5th in 2014. And so Irina and I were granted access to Kiev and a Hilton, actually, who hosted us to have a 300-person peace summit from members of the community from around the entire country. Yep. Yeah, Kiev is up here. Thanks. So through that process, a lot of discovering of shared values, Ukraine was really starting to become its own country then. And we were looking at, hey, listen, folks, let's look at how Poland transitioned from being a communist state to a democratic state, and then a little example of how we do things in the United States as far as distribution of power. So if you were living in Ukraine at that time in 2014 and you were working for the city of Bloomington, 98% of your funding would have come from the federal government, and they would have had your strategic plan done for you. Exactly. So makes it really easy. So the whole idea behind this was decentralization. How do we get the country, when it's at war here in the east and Crimea has been invaded, how do we get this place to look something like the European Union would want us in the first place? And you have to decentralize. You have to bring power to individual people. And through that training, Irina was listed as a CIA agent. It's an interesting news clip that I'm not going to show you here from the Moscow Nightly News in 2014, where she's described as being a CIA agent and part of Hillary Clinton's campaign. So I was shocked to learn all that she was keeping that from me, but... So the Peace Summit was all about bringing people in, all about designing principles that how we want to be governed. And so we went through a process of people from all regions declaring the principles in which they wanted to be governed by the new through decentralization. And anybody want to read that? Right? No. I can't either. And so teams put together actions, personal commitments through the process. And yeah, the rebirth of Ukraine. And then a lot of reforms were taking on. Their military was trained by the United States. Their police force was being trained by the United States and Europe. NATO was heavily involved. They had gone from a top-down military to a military that looks... Any veterans in here? Okay. Oh, a bunch of you. Thank you. And we know the power of a platoon. We know the power of an individual soldier in our military. They didn't understand that at all there. And now you can see it playing out in the battlefields of Ukraine. So... why are we doing all this? It's really about democracy versus autocracy. And when you take a look at what we're doing today, it's about survival. So Global Synergy Group, which was really developed and kind of matured as a youth development, like you're doing with your youth and bringing those young ladies up into introducing them. So we are also introducing youth to more democratic ways and using the power of social dynamic and bringing voices into the room. We shifted when the war started to survival. We had people calling, Rotaries calling, individuals that had gone through the training calling, how do we get medicine? How do we get bandages? How do we get food? How do we get some of these things? Red Cross wasn't there yet. Doctors Without Borders wasn't there yet. We didn't have anybody there. So it was all about bringing aid to them. Tomorrow's about healing and then rebuilding. And now we're starting to really focus on rebuilding. All the big players are there now, helping with food delivery, all those type of things. So this little ragtag unit that we had going on and connecting people throughout the country, I think a grant came out of here, right? A global grant to help Ukraine. Rena helped get organized all these grants and connected them with the Rotaries over there so they could get the food, so they could get the water, the filters, all those things to the right people. Okay. This hat was given to me by one of the Kharkiv, which is on eastern Ukraine, where that big, huge offensive took place last summer, where Ukraine regained a lot of their foothold. Your club helped this region provide shelter, provide food, provide transportation, help the elderly, people who are trapped in their homes. So that's what we did. We did food, shelter, medical, transit, communications, and things that we call dignity. Just whether it be a little lipstick or a teddy bear for a kid, or whatever it might be. So we're in this intermediate period, and our focus is community and government restoration and education. And you've seen the pictures; they're horrible. Which brings me to YouLEAD 2023. So what's this program? Here are some of the students coming here on August 9th for a 5-week program. They leave then September 17th. We just got word from Warsaw that on August 2nd, they are going to be interviewed by the U.S. Embassy. And the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv can't handle that right now because they have a skeleton crew. Okay, so we have to bring the youth that are coming here from Ukraine or other parts of wherever they're refugees and bring them into Warsaw, Poland. We'll have an interview on August 2nd. They'll stay there and then fly out. And that's just a handful. There are 30 youth coming. And I'll get into that in a little bit. And 3 chaperones. So week 1, this was last year. Week 1 was about government. And in each phase, they're introduced to the idea, then they'll go out and tour, then they'll ask questions, all the way to Friday, in which they reflect on and say, what do I need to do when I go back to my country, when I go back to my community, to take the lessons that I have learned from my mentors here in the U.S. and apply it to our communities. And so the first week was all about government. There you are. Yeah, Jamie. And in fact, Bloomington was a day stop for them to go in and really dive deep into what it means to engage your citizens. What does it mean to involve citizens in decision making? How do you do that? How do you gauge that? When I was in Boryspil, where most of these kids are from, their front of their city hall has a door that big. And as you walk in, there is right away a guard. And this is sort of the mentality of openness to government. Government has always been closed, and they're trying to open it now. They're trying to be, hey, we are different than our Soviet past. And so this was really interesting for them to come into this awareness. And as they saw the mayor of Hopkins, Gene Maxwell, he was former mayor, lead them in a discussion, and then they're walking down the hall, he notices a napkin has missed the receptacle, and he bends down and picks that up and he throws it away. Later they see him wiping the tables and they're going, are you sure that's the mayor? But it was stunning to them, and the example that they got, the rides they were getting from CEO of this place, or the mayor, or other people being generous, coming to Rotaries and seeing Wow. You mean when there's still life after 50? Like, yeah, yeah. All of these things were learning opportunities for them as they did that. Week 2 is culture and society, in which they're demonstrating their culture to us, and we're introducing parts of the Minnesota culture with them. And we explore a lot of what makes us who we are, why culture is important to us, what do we have in similarities and what do we have in differences. And they discover, yeah, we have, for whatever cultural differences there are, there's a whole lot more that we have in common. And this is some of the discovery that they went through. And you can see the Stone Arch Bridge here. We're talking about the history of Minneapolis and what made it. Week 3 is business and entrepreneurship. In order for Ukraine to survive in the long run, it's going to need entrepreneurs. It's going to need business. Government plays a major role in that as far as providing an environment in which business can thrive. But business really has got to rule the day they have to get back on their feet economically. They've been devastated. Mines have been devastated. Farm fields have been devastated. Their trade has been devastated. Their technology sectors are about the only thing that's advancing right now because they're doing breakthrough military advances. Their advances in AI are outstripping the U.S. right now, and artificial intelligence being able to design things. It's really quite amazing. But to be able to get that from a wartime application to a peacetime application. So they are going to be talking to businesses, entrepreneurs, making connections, saying, hi, can you help me how can I stay in touch with you throughout the years as I develop my contacts here in the United States? This is not an enabling program. This is an enabling program. It is about teaching them the skills that they're going to need, giving them the contacts that they're going to need, creating the plans that they're going to want to put forward. Here's a small business entrepreneurial roundtable, and you can't see it up here, but this is a farm implement store out in Renville County, and then Upshur Smith is local. It's in the not too far from here. This was the Minnesota Economic Forum in which the kids were able to talk to the business people from around the Twin Cities. Community and volunteering is a core pillar of our program as well. It's not just about receiving; it's about giving back. The Ukrainians all volunteered at Rotary functions to give back to the people who had made this program powerful for them, made it possible for them. And so this was another new thing for them. Now, I don't know, how many of you are familiar with Merrick? Okay. Merrick is a place of industry which employs people that are out of the mainstream. They have a learning difficulty, they have a physical impairment that doesn't allow them to work in mainstream, so they are housed in Merrick and provided opportunities for employment, full employment. And the CEO of Merrick is really tied into Zubas. So he knows the originator of Zubas, and so he made sure every Ukrainian wore Zubas for this promotional picture of his. But yeah, they are. Yeah, so they felt pretty stylish. Yeah, So that was quite an experience for them. This is another, like coming to Rotary. Wow, look at all these useful old people. And then now, look at what they're doing. They're not throwing people away. People aren't locked up. People aren't hidden. There's a real stigma in the eastern part of the former Soviet Union where a child with a handicap, a child with a learning disability, was considered a bit of a leftover from, a curse on the family. And so there isn't the outpouring of love and affection historically from this community. And so when they're involved in this community and they're seeing people that historically their society is put into institutions, okay? Some of these kids come from those institutions where they were cast aside, and not considered a little bit of the refuse of society. And so this was highly impactful for them. And my little quibs about Rotary, you have to understand, people were normally retiring at 55 in Ukraine, and an average man would live to 57. So to see people in their 60s, their 70s, their 80s contributing, being here in the room, trying to make a difference in their community well into their late years and being highly productive was something that was remarkable for them and really had them thinking about what is the future of our community, of our country going to look like when we get up to the standards where we're no longer life expectancy of 57, but our life expectancy is the same as the rest of the developed world. Week 5, education and learning. You go to a high school in Ukraine, and there's not a sports team, there's not theater, there's not music. It's really about the basic of education. Some of the benefits to that when our 14-year-olds were in the senior high school, they were questioning why they were so far. Our high schoolers were so far behind in math. I've already taken this, and this is the senior class I'm sitting in. On the other hand, they were amazed at the social learning that was going on, right? And the people who played music were going, you can play in a band? You have music in your school, and you consider that a value. You are learning, you're having athletics outside of school. You're having gym class. You have all of this as part, and so this was a real cultural awakening for them, and some of the ideas that school isn't just about the integration of knowledge, it's also the integration of people. And so they had opportunities to blend with kids at school and learn what their systems are like. And actually meet some pretty interesting and precocious grade schoolers, young kids who asked them to read to them, and it was quite impactful for them to be part of this group. So family was also big. Each one of our students gets placed with the family, and the family is responsible for getting them back and forth and taking them to different parts of Minnesota, and that was a very important part. And the final project was a mock-up of just an exercise in how to plan a project, and they planned for, this is a group from 2022, to have a project in 2023 for YouLEAD for this program. We didn't know if it was going to happen. When we told them that this was hypothetical, they said, no, it's not, we're going to do it. And so they they formed their, kept their cohort going in Ukraine and did the recruiting. Over 130 students applied to come here to the United States for this program, and we had room for 20, but it turned out to be we have room for 30. So they were quite persuasive. So that is, that was it. How can I
What
help
happens
you?
after they go back to Ukraine, Richard? What sort of ongoing connection and support happens?
So, great question. So what happens after they go back to Ukraine? Well, each one of them had to go back with a plan about what they were going to do to help their community or help their school, most of them are volunteers in the war effort, in some fashion or other, or helping their community. They are running the food banks, they are running the clothing drives, they are stitching camouflage for the military, you name it, they are doing all of that in their off time as high school students. In addition to that, actually one of the 14-year-olds is now in the Army. He was 14, he has been employed by the Army as a cyber attack specialist. An amazingly bright young man who shut down the Moscow banking system for one day by doing a hack into their system. He now helps. So these kids were looked at as real assets for the community. They are keeping in contact with many of the American mentors who they connected with. So when they have a question, when they have a cyber question, we have real cyber experts that they're talking to. When there is a question of entrepreneurship, they have those people. Some wanted to be teachers, one of them wanted to go into the medical profession. This year, when the students come, we're hooking up with the organization that is helping Ukrainians with prosthetics, protes. And they are, some of them are interested in that. And so it is, there's a lot of echoes that go on the program. And our first one in 2011, that person is now on the cabinet of, one of the students is from 2011 is on the cabinet of Zelensky. So there's a lot of echoes from here in Minnesota to where they're at today.
One of the, I wonder what your comments might be, besides the daily casualty stats and things of that sort, they had a very interesting interview or focus in the Wall Street Journal about Zelensky and his focus on what it would be like if in fact he does reclaim the territory, and especially the eastern provinces, which of course had the same kind of Russification of the Baltic states, but then post-2014 had 10 years of re-education of these youths and deportations and all those kind of things that have only increased since the invasion. How he would deal in bringing back those people into a unified Ukraine. And I know kind of re-education and integration and just thinking, teaching thinking skills is part of what you're doing, but how big a challenge is that going to be for the country? Is it something that you're going to be able to overcome? Because I know Zelensky expressed concerns about that.
Yeah, I see it as a generational thing. And it's one of the, we're going to spend 2 days just on that subject. We have Russian-speaking soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, who've come to Minnesota, acquired their limbs, were convalescing in Lviv, which is near Poland, so on that side of the community, never spoke Ukrainian, speaking Russian, and getting some snickers and some consternation from the Ukrainians in the community, as if giving my legs and other parts of my body to the war wasn't enough to prove my loyalty. That's why I started with the Holodomor and the mass starvation. There has been some trauma to this to Ukraine, and you've seen the pictures. You've seen Bakhmut. You've seen the early pictures of the war where people are scattered on streets and just executed. It has. I don't know. I think it's going to be generational. I think they're going to have to be very careful. I think Ukraine's going to have to be very sensitive. I think they're going to have to let them speak Russian and not make a big deal out of it and welcome them back without judgment. And that's going to be very, very hard. One of the things that we saw, a Rotarian from Nikolaev that we are in touch with as a result of your generosity or the global grant, was talking about the subject matter of what the community is going to need. Said almost every city official is in the Army, dead or gone. We don't have skilled people to run this community once we get it back, once we get peace. So we need leaders who are going to come in, who understand how to rebuild this stuff in order to do it. You're having all of these military, the whole country. It's hard to fathom for most of us what it's like to mobilize an entire country for war and what that has done. And women play such an important role in the community. I hearken back to World War II and our factories being run, right? It's the same thing. The men are in the field. These kids that are coming, many of their fathers are in the front line. And so to repair that, the mental reparations repairs are going to be the most difficult. The scars that you've seen, buildings can be rebuilt. Great question. Mm-hmm.
Yes. In the cohorts you've had, Rich, have you seen some of the young people have a spark or very interest for entrepreneurship? And if so, is there an infrastructure for access to capital to get businesses?
Great question. Yes, there's a great deal of interest in entrepreneurship. I'd say half the kids coming this time have listed that as their number one interest. Rebuilding Ukraine through business, right? And it remains to be seen if the Marshall Program that has been talked about, Ukraine's Marshall Program, and the funding that's going to come in is going to provide them access. And so I'm really hopeful that they will. What they're going to need is people, business people, to help them and guide them and have friends in the right places that can give them the advice and the tutoring that they're going to need, and markets for their products. Yes, sir.
Is there, with the group that has come over recently, is there a consensus on what it would take to achieve peace in Ukraine?
No. Well, it depends on your question. To stop the war?
No, I guess that's the definition of peace.
Right now, it's over 80%. The polls are showing over 80%. It was reflected in the youth too. You can imagine having a parent on the front line. You want your parent to survive, and at the same time, the parent is going, we're not going to be subjects of Vladimir Putin. And we don't want our territory invaded by Russia. And we're going to reclaim it. Now, whether that ends up being in the 2014 boundary, with Crimea now permanently annexed into Russia, I can't predict that one.
That was a Gallup poll that over the weekend. They said over 80%. No compromise. No.
Yep.
no territory ceded, and that includes Crimean, because they want Crimean back.
Yep, they want all of it, but whether they'll be able to.
Will the overwhelming majority of Orthodox Christians there accept the new Ukrainian patriarchate, or is there also going to have a lot of religious talks? Does anybody still accept, other than the former priests, accept the Russian patriarchate as opposed to the new Ukrainian one?
Well, that's above my pay grade. Just I'm getting a call in. It has been I mean, they switched their Christmas celebration this year to December 25th rather than in January 6th or 9th. I'm forgetting now which day it was. Epiphany, the 6th. And all to say we don't want anything to do with this. And they've arrested a number of patriarchs or head of the churches for collaborating and sending information to the Russians for strikes.
We gonna wrap up?
Yeah.
Do you have an ask?
Do I have an ask? Well, on your table, if you are so inclined, there's a flyer, and it has a QR code that you can, if you care to donate. Right now, we're trying to raise about $90,000, and we're about $45,000 into it. The rest is funded by my wife and I, and so temporarily, we're confident that that's temporary. And so if you're interested, it costs about $3,000 a student to get them here. And so anything that you could do there. We're also going to be looking for drivers and host families. We're a little bit out of this region, so I would say if somebody's going to host, they have to be prepared to drive a little bit. Or get 3 or 4 families in an area that can carpool. And that's what we're doing. Our host families right now are located in White Bear Lake and in the Plymouth area. We are going to be doing quite a bit of programming in this area, so that helps. And I had some different additional information here too, in case you are interested in some of the hosting opportunities. And we're also looking for mentors. So if you have a heart for young people and you think you have something to offer them on their journey, on their leadership journey, please let me know. And the information is on this right here. So.
Yeah, something. Up until recently, the Rotary Foundation would allow you to designate your contributions for use in Ukraine. And I don't know if they're still doing that or not.
That money has run out.
You know, one last thing I'll say is, I think some of you know that I'm not just a disinterested observer here. I'm the chair of the board for Local Synergy Group, and appreciate in the past the members who've been generous in supporting this program. Our club has provided financial support through contributions from the members here over the last couple of years. So if you are interested in supporting them again, why don't you just talk to me, because I'd like for our club to perhaps step up and sponsor one of the students, if not in full, at least in part, and would appreciate any consideration. So.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for your attention. I really